what you want, when you want it, where you want it. This is The Mesh.
This episode of the Caregiver Community is sponsored by Pace at Home. During this uncertain time, Pace at Home is enrolling participants who wish to continue to remain at home. Partnering with families, Pace at Home provides caring medical support for all of our program's participants. Visit us on our website or give us a call at 828-468-3980 to talk with a representative that can discuss with you the Pace at Home all-inclusive medical approach. Pace at Home is the champion for seniors wishing to remain in their community.
Welcome to the Caregiver Community. This is a place where we talk about the joys and the challenges of caring for our aging parents and loved ones, as well as caring for ourselves. I am Frances Hall, founder and executive director of ACAP Community, Adult Children of Aging Parents. In this podcast, we are going to talk about life after caregiving, something that most caregivers experience, and frankly, a stage of caregiving that can bring challenges of its own. I am delighted to be joined by Reverend Gary Newsome, Chaplain and Director of Spiritual Life at Lake Prince Woods Retirement Community in Suffolk, Virginia. Gary has been a licensed ordained minister for 12 years and has a master's in pastoral studies. He is a hospice chaplain and a bereavement coordinator, so he provides lots of spiritual support for patients and families in palliative care and at the end of the life, and for the family for a time even beyond the death of a loved one. To be completely transparent, Lake Prince Woods is a community of every age, ACAP's wonderful collaborative partner. Hi, Gary. Thank you for joining us today to talk about such an important topic and so universal. It's like everybody pretty much experiences this. So thank you. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Frances, and thank you for the opportunity to share. It is truly an honor.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so anticipating the time when our caregiver journey has ended can be difficult. I've done that a couple of times now. It means that the one we are caring for, our loved one, is no longer here. Not only do we anticipate the grief associated with the loss, it also means that our daily life will be different. And all of that can be so hard to imagine. So let's kind of unpack some of this. Let's talk about some things. Gary, what do most people experience when their caregiver journey ends? In other words, when somebody has been a caregiver for an older adult loved one and that loved one dies, what do caregivers typically experience and often struggle with as they deal with life after caregiving?
Yes. Well, I think it's first important to note and to understand that the support of caregiving, it could be a span of over weeks, months, and sometimes years. So one can imagine the emotional and spiritual buildup during that time. So what loved ones experience after a loved one dies, they'll experience natural grief, something that we all experience when we lose a loved one. I love this quote. Someone said, grief is an individual imprint. In other words, each person is different in their own personality, how they deal with grief, and the longevity of it. But most of all, I believe that an experience that loved ones experience withdrawal, there could be an overwhelming sense of loss that's really hard to process. And this sometimes could necessitate counseling or attention in a group setting. The other things that caregivers experience, and this is really interesting, a sense of guilt. Mm-hmm. Did I do enough? Could I have prevented some of the decline? Was I perfect? And then you have to think, is this real or is it imagined? So that's a tough thing to process through your mind.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing is, and I think this is very important, and it doesn't get mentioned within this context a lot, is the caregivers miss the actual routine of giving care. In other words, there's a schedule, there's the propping of the pillow, there's the feeding, there's the washing of the clothes, there's the prayers, there are other things that go on in terms of the routine. And these routines bring purpose and self-worth. So when that is taken away, a caregiver may feel lost. Their perspective may be skewed a little bit, and just in terms of who they are. And there's a journey that actually continues after their loved one dies in reintroducing themselves to people, the world, family, and those kind of things. And we just pray that there's a positive effect versus a negative effect after that.
That's interesting that you commented, Gary, on the routine of caregiving, and that routine, what we are accustomed to for whatever length of time, is disrupted. That it's no longer. And so I remember with my mother and her caregiving situation with her mother, my grandmother, was extremely intense. And I remember that it took a real toll on her, and that it took at least a year or even more for Mom to kind of get back among the, as I always said, kind of get back among the living, because everything that she had known for so long was no longer. And she had to reclaim and re-understand who is she as a person, and what does her life mean at that point.
Yeah, because the mere nature of caregiving, you almost lose yourself in that process.
Absolutely. Often people do.
Yeah.
Jobs are affected. Relationships with family and friends are affected. What we normally, naturally, typically do in terms of activities and recreation and just everything can get affected. And so, when we take that out, all of a sudden we are left with this big hole of, well, now how do we plug that up?
Yeah, and that's why support systems, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about that, but that's why some of the support and the resources available can help getting that person back to homeostasis, if you will,
Right.
and well-being and an emotional human being that is caring and still loving. So again, there are negative things, but there also could be positive things that would come out of that.
That's a great segue, and a question that really had not even occurred to me. Can you talk? I mean, we know the negative, we know the grief, we know the sadness, we know that emptiness, but what are some positive things that can come from life after caregiving?
Well, I've had experiences dealing with caregivers after the experience, just in terms of becoming more of a loving person. Perhaps finding their calling in life. I've known some that have gone on to be either a certified nursing assistant or a nurse, going back to school, volunteering at a place like this here at Lake Prince, or other facilities, perhaps a hospital. So you can actually find yourself, if you will, in that process, and you can dedicate your life to be as I mentioned, a loving person, to be a caring person, or this is what I really want to pursue in my life. So those years or months or whatever validates that person. And it actually becomes a very positive experience.
That's lovely. And yes, a lot of times what people, I think, experience as a caregiver, they didn't know they had it in them. And they learn some skills and become aware of some things that they would not have otherwise, would not have known. And so, yeah, exactly. I'm thinking about my mother during this in terms of her caregiving situation and the after caregiving. And because the rescue squad in our little town in Alabama had been so helpful during my grandmother's lifetime, that after my grandmother died, my mother at the age of 62, 64 or 65 became an EMT, and would do the ambulance runs and all that kind of stuff. And it was like, I remember that my brother and I were like, really? Mom is doing this? So you're absolutely correct. There are all sorts of things that we can learn and become aware of through the caregiving experience that truly propel us
Yes.
and make us not a different person, but a different person.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Nicely put, Francis. Very nice.
Okay. So this is great segue. So while we are in that caregiving journey, what are some things we can do at that point? And sometimes, and I know this, and sometimes it's, in all our spare time and with all our spare energy in the midst of a caregiving situation. But what are some things that we can do during that time to help prepare us for life after caregiving?
Well, I'm really big on community. That's a big buzzword. It's not only just people, and that's a very important part, being around the caregiver, but community is an atmosphere where it fosters a sense of belonging, a sense of peace and joy. It fosters selflessness, giving, and sharing, which is what the caregiver has been doing all along. But when you're in a group setting like that, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a support group, it could be a church, it could be bingo, it'd be card games, bowling with people, family gatherings. All of those are resources to promote strength and confidence. Um, I think that's one of the biggest things to surround yourself with positive people and to kind of keep your mind diversified and not just on the toil of caregiving. I think one of the other things that can be done as well, and this is hard, is to pay close attention to your own soul, if you will, your own well being. And these are the simple things like exercise, listening to music, possibly getting away for a little while for some respite, relieving of caregiving duties so you can be refreshed, uh, asking for help. How many, and I've seen caregivers don't ask for the help. They feel that they can do it all alone. Sometimes they get isolated in that support and in that care, and they just forget about themselves. Talking with someone, being honest with another person, praying with someone just ignites that grace of God and that energy that you're going to need. All of those things could help the inevitable and during that time while you're caring for yourself.
Right. Yeah. And again, those are some, I'm going to call them life skills that we need during the caregiving process or caregiver time, but we also need them afterwards. And of course, every time we talk about church or any of that, we really are talking about faith communities, whatever,
Yes.
wherever someone feels drawn and led. Yeah.
Yeah,
Whatever the
yes,
expression is.
that's very important, and it's not just to hear theology, but it's just that, and we have that here at Lake Prince, where I encourage our residents not just to come to church to be a good or a bad person and those kind of things, or it's a sense of community where people are coming together. It's a sense where there's an atmosphere of worship and singing and togetherness and talking and getting to know one another. And sometimes we take those things for granted. So it's always important to be plugged in, no matter what type of community that you belong to.
Right. Absolutely. You have mentioned grief, and we've kind of talked about grief as we've talked already. We often think about grief as being the grief after someone passes. That's kind of when we typically think about grief, we think of that kind of loss. But there are other kinds of losses and other kind of grief. Can you talk some about other kinds of grief that might be part of this life after caregiving?
Yes, that's a very good question. One of the big ones, if you will, is anticipatory grief. It's
Mm,
very common, and grief in the heart of the matter, especially anticipatory grief, it asks the question, how do we learn how to say goodbye? And I remember during the Ronald Reagan years when he was declining, and it finally came out that he had Alzheimer's. But Ronald Reagan, the patient, was trying to prepare his wife, Nancy. And I think we all remember the phrase, the long goodbye.
right, right.
And that is a way he was trying to prepare his own wife for this anticipatory grief that I may not be around long and I need you to be prepared. And I don't want you to uh, be overcome with grief and worry, but I'm just trying to prepare you. So it's that anticipatory grief. On the other side of that, there's shock, there's denial, there's a refusal sometimes in anticipatory grief to talk about the inevitable in a
Mm.
healthy way. There is a healthy way to talk about death, but that gets lost in the process of support and taking care of someone. It
Oh,
can
and
also,
that's so hard. It's so hard to talk about that person's death. I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh, no, you're absolutely correct, Francis. It's very hard to talk about it because, during the support, there's so many things to attend to and to care about. But unfortunately, this anticipatory grief, it can turn into anger, emotional changes. Uh, Sometimes there's even an anger at God at why is this happening? Why are you allowing these things to happen? And then the anger, it can turn into a deep concern for the future. I mean, already thinking about life without my loved one or the one I'm caring for. And if you have that kind of thinking, you have diminished hope, diminished energy, and you're already depleted. So we really need to watch out for this anticipatory grief, um, and get some knowledge, healthy knowledge, a healthy way of thinking about the end. The other type of grief is something called complicated grief. And now, this is a type of grief that may require some counseling and group setting attention because this is a prolonged grief, sometimes for years. I've known people who have suffered loss, especially the loss of a spouse, and the grief prolongs over years. And they're withdrawn, they don't participate, their thought processes are different. Those are called complicated grief. And again, it may necessitate in a group setting, counseling, or some group counseling that help that person to see things in the right perspective.
Right, right. Um, I think probably most people, I may be mistaken here, but I'm kind of thinking that most people experience some level of anticipatory grief,
Yeah.
which is just recognizing that this person that we love and that we are caring for is going to be going away, and that there is nothing we can do to stop that from happening. And that's really hard, but it's really important to recognize what we can do about that. But I loved your definition of anticipatory grief. Will you read that or say that one more time?
Yes, anticipatory grief asks the question, how do we learn how to say goodbye?
How do we learn how to say goodbye?
Yeah.
That's good stuff. Because the reality is our entire life is a series of both acquiring, but probably more saying goodbye. to lots of different ways. So I really like that definition. Really like that.
Yeah, and that's pretty much in its simplest form. Clinically speaking, there's actually a term for this complicated grief. It's called persistent complex bereavement disorder. Now, that's a mouthful, of course, but it would be equivalent to PTSD, or what a military person may go through after coming back from, overseas or war, seeing so many things. And those are pretty serious. And we do have caregiving situations where one may fall into that category.
Sure, sure. Well, and caregiving can be really intense. And at its best, it can be intense, but it can be very intense. And so that analogy of sort of a PTSD, I'd want to think about that a little more, but I'm not sure that is very far off. That kind of makes some sense. I had never heard the long mouthful. I just have always heard of complicated grief, which kind of suggests that the relationship and the passing of the loved one, that there's just so much wrapped up in that there's just lots to unpack.
Yes, absolutely. And particularly when, as I mentioned earlier, there are caregiving experiences where you're giving support over a span of years, especially in a hospice situation. There are some times where the inevitable doesn't happen right away.
Right.
So there's such a buildup emotionally and spiritually, and eventually that has to be channeled or released in some fashion.
Right. It's sort of like holding your breath for
Yes.
a very long time.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, since we're talking about the grief and life after caregiving, you mentioned earlier about support, and we've talked some about some support, but talk more, please, about types of support that are available for the former caregiver. Where can people turn? What are some sort of universal places that people can turn for support after the caregiving journey ends?
Well, Francis, you and I know there are so many resources that we have that are available to us online and in books and magazines and just locally. So many resources. Some of the ones that come to mind are the Alzheimer's Association, the American Cancer Society, VA caregiver care. Hospitals are a great resource. Hospitals provide support and programming. And they do a wonderful job for local and regional people that are living in those areas. One organization that we all know about that I was part of for many years is hospice organizations. Now, hospice organizations have built in bereavement specialists. There's a whole unit that have specialized, highly trained bereavement counselors, social workers, volunteers, and there are programs after the person dies where there are follow-up for mail. There's personal follow-up. There are things that are happening almost a year or two after the person passes away. And I don't know if people know this, but hospice is a government requirement when it's assessed and when it's appropriate. And it's also a government benefit. So within all of these organizations, there is so much help for that person after the fact.
Hospice is a wonderful organization, and I certainly encourage our listeners to learn as much as possible about your hospice, your local hospice. Let me ask a question though, relative to the journey after caregiving, when the loved one has passed. If they were not part of hospice prior to that death, would the caregiver or the loved one, the caregiver, would they be eligible to tap into hospice resources after the passing of a loved one, even though they were not part of hospice? Or do they need to be part of hospice in order to receive the benefits afterwards?
Yeah, they would have to be part of hospice
That,
to take
that's what I
advantage
thought.
of those benefits. If they were not, they would have to seek other caregiving support, which is readily available. It would be easy. I mean, there are the American Cancer Society and the Alzheimer's Association offhand, they have publications. And within those publications, there are those kinds of resources, places where they can actually go locally to get that help. But if it is hospice, you would have to be part of that.
Okay. And of course, I know Cancer Society, American Cancer Society, and Alzheimer's have wonderful resources when the people are going through it. I did not realize. Are you saying that Alzheimer's Association and Cancer Society and others have resources for the caregivers after their loved one has passed?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, they partner with organizations like Every Age, the organization I'm part of, and sometimes they have representatives that come on site to give explanations and presentations of what they do locally, and they invite the community to be part of that. So
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. Did not realize that. Okay. Let's talk about spiritual care. How does spiritual care, and I'm going to be very clear that this is not just for Christian people whose expression is Christianity, but rather for all faith expressions. What is the role of spiritual care in helping people navigate life after caregiving?
Well, spiritual care is really important because the goal of spiritual care is to relieve spiritual pain. Now, that's across denominations. It's not necessarily Christian. Anyone and all of us experience spiritual pain. Now, what is spiritual pain? Spiritual pain is loneliness, hopelessness, the inability to connect, it's self-worth, it's depression. It's a litany of things that we all go through certain times, especially through the loss of a loved one. So the goal of spiritual pain for either a chaplain, a pastor, a counselor, a social worker, there's some overlap in those titles, but all of the goals are the same: is to help minimize and eventually relieve some of the things that we're all plagued with. So the
And
role
so,
of spiritual care is very, very important. And I do want to say the role of a chaplain is a little bit more expansive than the role of a pastor. We all know that a pastor has a congregation, they have a building. A chaplain may have that, but a chaplain is outside of a building, is outside of a congregation when the whole world is their congregation. And you have to learn how to minister, for lack of a better word, to those who may be outside of your own denomination, your own religion, to learn how to minister to those people, to bring them to a wholeness or a soundness. Does that make sense?
absolutely, it does. Absolutely. My husband was a chaplain.
Okay.
So yes, I'm glad that you talked about the distinction of that. And again, chaplain can be from the Christian tradition, but also a rabbi or an
Yes.
imam. Chaplain is can be very much interfaith. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And today we're seeing spiritual care not only in the healthcare setting, but we're seeing spiritual care, of course, in the military. We're seeing it in the workplace. A lot of Fortune 500 companies see the value in spiritual care, and they have ancillary personnel, particularly chaplains, to help employees deal with work and family, divorce, those kind of things. So we're seeing the marketplace getting information and seeing the value of spiritual care.
Yeah. Just so fundamental for so many people. Bless you. This has been great information. Is there anything else, Gary, that we ought to be talking about, or that people that it would be helpful for people to know in terms of managing and navigating their journey after their caregiver journey?
Well, of course, we want to encourage those after their loved one passes away. There is hope, there is help, and they're not alone. I think one of the things that we tend to think about is, what can we do? We're always thinking as human beings, we feel that if we're not doing something, we're not as complete as we should be. Where the focus, especially after, who can I be? And I think if we concentrate on some of those things, I love with a German theologian, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, said, he said, when a loved one passes away, not even God fills that void. He said, God purposely leaves it open so that we can stay connected to our loved ones. And I think that's a phenomenal and profound statement, because even God would want us to be connected to our loved ones. So I want to give encouragement for those who have taken care of their spouse or their loved ones or whomever it was who had passed away, that to continue to keep that person alive, because they are who we are. They are representative of the legacy. And in so many important ways, we need to continue that legacy. So I would say, don't think about so much in doing. Think about who you can become. And I love this phrase: compassion is not just about caring for others. It is also about extending that same kindness and understanding to ourselves.
Amen. Yes, definitely. Definitely. That's a great way to end this. Thank you, Gary, so much. This has been some great information and just some really good stuff to be thinking about. To be thinking about as we go through, as we live our caregiver journey, but also particularly as we have ended that journey in that part of our lives. And we're trying to figure out, well, now what? What's next? So thank you. Thank you for being with us and helping us to understand these kinds of things that we can do.
Thank you.
I also want to say thank you to our listeners. We hope this information will be helpful as you continue your caregiver journey and beyond. We also certainly want to thank Pace at Home in Hickory, North Carolina. They are our sponsor for all Caregiver Community podcasts, and we are indeed grateful for their support. This Caregiver Community podcast is part of the Mesh network of online shows and podcasts. We record one new ACAP podcast each month, addressing a wide range of topics related to caregiving and advocating for an older adult. You will find our podcast on any platform where you listen to podcasts, as well as our website, www.acapcommunity.org. While you're on our site, we hope you will take a few minutes to learn more about ACAP, our educational programs, and our local chapters. And if there are other topics you would like for us to address as a podcast, please do let us know. Again, Gary, thank you for being with us, and thank you for you who are our listeners. Stay well, everyone. Bye for now.
You've been listening to The Mesh, an online media network of shows and programs ranging from business to arts, sports to entertainment, music to community. All programs are available on the website as well as through iTunes and YouTube. Check us out online at themesh.tv. Discover other network shows and give us feedback on what you just heard.